Hey there. Tonight we're traveling back, not to romantic tales of abundance and plenty, but to the quiet wisdom of our grandparents' pantries, where every jar held the difference between survival and starvation. You can smell the vinegar and salt, the sweet tang of properly fermented vegetables, the earthy richness of root cellars where time moved differently. Tonight, you'll discover foods that sustained entire communities through winters that lasted too long, through wars that took everything, through times when the supply chains we take for granted simply stopped. If this kind of slow, practical history helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if learning these old ways actually brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is out there listening to these quiet lessons from the past, maybe thinking about the uncertain times ahead. So dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan if you like that soft background hum. Settle in as we explore the forgotten foods that kept our ancestors alive through the hardest times. Foods that might just save your life when 2027 brings challenges we're only beginning to understand. Let's begin in the cold stone cellars where winter was never something to fear, but simply something to prepare for. You descend wooden steps that creak under your weight, each board worn smooth by generations of careful footsteps. The air grows cooler with every step, carrying the earthy smell of packed soil and the faint sweetness of stored apples. This is a root cellar from 1920, and in this dim, humid space, you discover the first secrets of survival that modern refrigeration made us forget. You don't need electricity down here, you don't need supply chains or delivery trucks. You just need to understand what your great-grandmother knew, that the earth itself is the greatest preserving force, and that certain foods, stored properly, can last through the longest winters. Your hands find rows of wooden crates filled with sand, and buried within that sand like treasure are parsnips and carrots still crisp months after harvest. The sand keeps them from drying out, keeps the cold from freezing them solid, keeps them fresh when there's nothing else. You pull one out, a carrot, still firm, still sweet, still alive in a way that nothing from a grocery store ever is. Sometimes you find turnips, their purple shoulders peeking through the sand like shy children. Sometimes rutabagas, heavy and yellow, tasting like a cross between cabbage and potatoes. These aren't foods we think about anymore, but in 1920, in 1870, in every winter, before central heating and global shipping, these root vegetables meant life itself. You don't realize how sweet a turnip can be until you've eaten nothing but preserved meat for 3 weeks. You don't understand the comfort of finding fresh vegetables in February until the alternative is scurvy, malnutrition, death. The root cellar holds other secrets too. Barrels filled with apples, each one wrapped in newspaper, stored in the coolest corner where they'll last until spring. Not the perfect waxed apples of today, but wrinkled, honest fruit that still carries vitamins, still provides the sugars and fiber that kept entire families healthy through months of darkness. Potatoes rest in wooden bins, covered with burlap to block any light that might cause them to sprout. These aren't just any potatoes, these are carefully selected varieties chosen specifically for their storage qualities. The German butterballs that could last 8 months, the russet Burbanks that grew sweeter in storage, varieties we've forgotten in favor of shipping convenience, but varieties that knew how to survive. You feel the cool dampness on your skin, smell the mineral richness of earth walls lined with stone. This isn't just food storage. This is insurance against uncertainty, preparation for times when the normal sources fail. Your ancestors understood something we've forgotten, that independence means having enough food stored properly to survive whatever comes next. In the deepest corner, you find the most precious treasures of all, the fermentation crocks. Heavy ceramic vessels with fitted lids, where magic happens slowly in the darkness. Sauerkraut that started as simple cabbage, transformed by salt and thyme into something that could prevent scurvy, provide probiotics, add flavor to the monotonous diet of preserved meat and stored grains. The process is so simple it seems impossible that we forgot it. Shred cabbage, add salt, pack it tight, wait, no refrigeration needed, no preservatives required. Just the ancient dance between beneficial bacteria and time, creating food that doesn't spoil, doesn't rot, but actually improves with age. You taste sauerkraut from these old crocks, not the pale, processed version from modern stores, but the real thing, tangy and alive with beneficial bacteria, rich with vitamins that develop during fermentation. This is food that sustained German immigrants through their first, harsh American winters, that kept sailors healthy on voyages that lasted months, that turned humble cabbage into medicine. Kimchi sits in neighboring crocks. Korean families answer to the same problem, how to keep vegetables fresh and nutritious through long winters. Napa cabbage transformed with garlic, ginger, fish sauce, and thyme into something that burns pleasantly on your tongue, wakes up your digestion, provides nutrition when fresh vegetables are memory. These aren't exotic foods requiring special equipment or modern technology. These are solutions developed by ordinary people facing the simple reality that winter comes, supply chains fail, and survival depends on what you've prepared in advance. Solutions we might need again sooner than we think. The root cellar teaches you patience, teaches you to think in seasons rather than days, teaches you that security comes not from convenience stores and delivery apps, but from understanding how food works, how preservation works, how independence works. As you climb those wooden steps back into the modern world, you carry with you knowledge that might just save your life when the easy answers stop working. You stand in a smokehouse from 1880 where the air is thick with hickory smoke and the ancient wisdom of salt. Here, hanging from rough wooden beams, are the meats that carried families through winters, through wars, through times when fresh protein was luxury and preserved protein was survival. The smell is intoxicating. Wood smoke and salt and thyme working together in the way they have for thousands of years. Salt pork hangs in long strips, white fat marbled with lean meat, each piece coated in coarse salt that draws out moisture, prevents spoilage, creates food that can last years without refrigeration. You don't need freezers for this. You don't need vacuum sealers or preservatives with names you can't pronounce. You just need salt, smoke, and the patience to let time work its magic. Your hands touch the rough texture of salt-cured ham, feeling the firm density that tells you moisture has been drawn out, that harmful bacteria cannot survive here. This ham could hang in a cool, dry place for 2 years, 3 years, growing more complex in flavor, more concentrated in nutrition, more valuable as fresh meat becomes scarce. You learn the difference between quick modern curing and the slow, patient work our ancestors understood. Modern bacon, pumped full of liquid cure and rushed to market in weeks. Traditional bacon, buried in salt for weeks, then smoked slowly until the meat becomes something entirely different. Something that doesn't need refrigeration, something that improves with age, something that turns a few pounds of fresh pork into protein that could save your family when there's nothing else. The process seems almost magical until you understand the science. Salt draws water from meat, creates an environment too hostile for the bacteria that cause spoilage. Smoke adds antimicrobial compounds, creates a protective coating, contributes flavors that make even the simplest meal satisfying. Time allows these processes to work completely, thoroughly, creating preservation that modern shortcuts can never match. Beef jerky hangs from other beams, cut with the grain into strips that bend without breaking, seasoned with salt and smoke and sometimes wild herbs that add both flavor and additional preservative qualities. This isn't the sweet, processed jerky from gas stations. This is protein concentrated into its purest form, food that could sustain a traveling family for weeks, that provided complete nutrition when hunting was poor and stored grains ran low. Native American pemmican rests in parfleche containers nearby, the ultimate survival food developed over centuries of understanding what the human body needs to survive harsh conditions. Lean meat, pounded fine and mixed with rendered fat and sometimes berries, creating food that contains complete protein, essential fats, vitamins, and enough calories to sustain heavy work in cold conditions. You taste authentic pemmican, not the modern health food version, but the real thing made by people whose lives depended on its nutritional completeness. It tastes like concentrated life, rich with fat that your modern diet-conscious mind wants to reject, but your body recognizes exactly what it needs for energy, for warmth, for survival. The smokehouse holds other treasures too: fish, split and salt-cured, then cold-smoked till they become flexible, portable protein that could last months. Salmon prepared this way sustained Pacific Northwest tribes through long winters, provided the protein necessary for survival when the rivers froze and fresh fish became impossible to catch. You smell the complexity of different woods used for smoking: hickory for its strong, penetrating smoke that could preserve large pieces of meat completely, applewood for its mild sweetness that enhanced, rather than overwhelmed, delicate flavors, oak for its steady, consistent burn that could maintain proper smoking temperatures for days. Each wood contributed not just flavor, but specific preservative compounds, antimicrobial substances that worked with salt and thyme to create food that didn't spoil, didn't rot, but actually became more nutritious and digestible through the curing process. Our ancestors chose their smoking woods not for trendy flavors, but for their ability to create genuinely preserved food. Salt cod hangs in another corner, whole fish that have been split, salted, and air-dried until they become hard as wood, completely shelf-stable, capable of lasting years in a cool, dry place. This is the food that enabled long sea voyages, that sustained fishing communities through months when storms made fishing impossible, that provided complete protein when all other sources failed. You learn to recognize properly cured meat, how it should feel firm but not brittle, how the color should be deep and consistent, how the smell should be clean and smoky without any hint of spoilage. These are skills your great-grandparents took for granted, skills that might become essential again when modern preservation methods become unreliable or unavailable. The smokehouse teaches patience, teaches respect for the processes that sustain life, teaches the difference between food that merely fills your stomach and food that can actually save your life, as smoke swirls around you in the dim light filtering through wooden slats. You understand that preservation isn't just about making food last longer. It's about creating independence, security, the confidence that comes from knowing you can survive whatever comes next. You find yourself in a farmhouse kitchen from 1910 where rows of mason jars line wooden shelves like soldiers prepared for battle against hunger and want. The air is sharp with vinegar and alive with the spices that transform ordinary vegetables into preserved foods capable of sustaining life through the hardest times. Here you discover the acidic magic that makes fresh vegetables last months, years, even decades without refrigeration. Pickled beets gleam like rubies in their clear glass jars, still crisp months after harvest, still rich with the vitamins and minerals that prevent deficiency diseases when fresh vegetables become memory. You don't need fancy equipment for this preservation, just vinegar, salt, and the understanding that acid creates an environment where beneficial preservation can happen while harmful bacteria cannot survive. Your fingers trace the smooth glass of jars filled with pickled cucumbers, not the sweet, processed pickles of modern grocery stores, but the real thing, dill pickles made with nothing but cucumbers, dill, garlic, salt, and vinegar, fermented slowly until they develop the complex tang that makes simple vegetables into something your body craves, something that provides probiotics and nutrition long after the original harvest has passed. You learn the difference between quick pickling and true fermentation, between foods that are merely flavored with acid and foods that have been transformed by beneficial bacteria into something more nutritious than the original vegetables. Real fermented pickles are alive with lactobacillus cultures that improve your digestion, support your immune system, help your body extract maximum nutrition from simple foods. Pickled cabbage sits in heavy crocks, but this isn't the Germanic sauerkraut from the root cellar. This is cabbage preserved in vinegar brine, creating food that can last years without any refrigeration, food that provides vitamin C and fiber when scurvy threatens, when malnutrition becomes the difference between survival and death. The process is so simple it seems impossible that we've forgotten it. Chop vegetables, pack them in clean jars, cover with vinegar brine, wait. The acid environment prevents spoilage while preserving nutrients, creating food that's actually more digestible than fresh vegetables, food that your gut can process efficiently even when stress and hardship have compromised your digestive system. Pickled green tomatoes fill another shelf, end-of-season tomatoes that never had time to ripen, transformed into tangy vegetables that provide vitamins and flavor through winter months. This is food that wastes nothing, that turns garden surplus into preservation security, that demonstrates the mindset our ancestors needed to survive, the understanding that abundance must be preserved for scarcity. You taste pickled onions, sharp and bright with acetic acid that burns pleasantly on your tongue, onions that retain their nutritional value months after harvest, that can add flavor to monotonous meals of preserved meat and stored grains. Small pearl onions, pickled whole with spices that mask any hint of spoilage, that provide the sulfur compounds your body needs for liver function, for immune system support. Pickled peppers hang in vinegar solutions that preserve not just the vegetables, but the capsaicin that makes them hot, the compounds that stimulate circulation, aid digestion, provide vitamin C in concentrations that prevent scurvy. These aren't decorative condiments, these are medicines preserved in food form, solutions to nutritional deficiencies that could kill when modern supplements become unavailable. The kitchen holds more complex pickled preparations too. Mixed vegetables, cauliflower, carrots, green beans, peppers, all preserved together in spiced vinegar that creates complete nutritional profiles, meals in jars that could sustain a family when fresh vegetables become impossible to obtain. Pickled eggs rest in gallon jars filled with beet-colored brine, complete proteins preserved in acid solutions that keep them safe for months without refrigeration. These eggs retain their nutritional value, their complete amino acid profiles, their ability to provide the building blocks your body needs for muscle maintenance, immune function, basic survival. You smell the complexity of spicing that goes beyond mere flavor. Bay leaves that provide antimicrobial compounds, peppercorns that add preservative volatile oils, mustard seeds that contribute natural antibiotics. Every spice serves dual purposes, enhancing taste and extending preservation, creating food that's both satisfying to eat and genuinely capable of sustaining life. Pickled fish appears in some jars, herring and other small fish preserved in vinegar brines that maintain their omega-3 fatty acids, their complete proteins, their essential minerals. This is food that could prevent the malnutrition diseases that killed so many before modern medicine, food that provides what the human body actually needs to function under stress. The farmhouse kitchen teaches you that preservation is chemistry, but chemistry so simple that anyone can master it with practice and patience. Acid levels, salt concentrations, proper sterilization. These aren't complicated concepts requiring advanced education, but practical skills that every household once understood as naturally as lighting a fire or drawing water from a well. As you stand among these preserved treasures, you realize you're looking at insurance policies written in glass and vinegar, at security systems that depend not on electricity or supply chains, but on understanding how acid works, how beneficial bacteria work, how patience and preparation create foods capable of sustaining life through whatever challenges lie ahead. These pickled vegetables didn't just prevent scurvy, they created the beneficial bacteria that kept our ancestors' digestive systems perfect, even during the stress of survival situations. Modern science proves this connection between fermented foods and gut health that our ancestors lived by. If you want these same digestive benefits while learning these preservation skills, I use something based on these same principles. With traditional ingredients like the dandelion and fennel, our ancestors valued for gut health. Check the comments. You stand in a stone mill from 1840 where massive millstones turn slowly, grinding grain with the patient rhythm that sustained civilizations for thousands of years. The air is thick with flour dust and the sweet smell of fresh ground wheat, corn, rye, grains that our ancestors understood not just as ingredients, but as the foundation of survival itself. Here you discover the forgotten knowledge of how grains become food that can save your life. Whole wheat berries fill wooden bins, hard kernels that look almost like small stones, but contain within themselves complete nutrition. Protein, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins, minerals. You don't need to process these immediately. You don't need refrigeration or special storage. Properly dried and stored in cool, dark places, wheat berries can remain viable for decades, ready to provide sustenance when everything else fails. Your hands sink into bins of these grain berries, feeling their weight, their hardness, their promise. Wheat berries that could be ground fresh each day, providing flour that retains all its nutritional value, all its ability to sustain human life through the longest hardships, not the processed, enriched flour of modern supermarkets, stripped of nutrients and pumped full of preservatives, but the real thing, grain as nature and careful selection created it. You learn the difference between survival grains and convenience grains, between varieties selected for their ability to store indefinitely and varieties bred for shipping convenience and visual appeal. Hard red wheat that contains more protein, that produces flour capable of making bread, that actually nourishes rather than merely filling space in your stomach. Spelt rests in neighboring bins, ancient grain that our ancestors understood as more digestible than modern wheat, easier on sensitive digestive systems, capable of providing nutrition even when stress and hardship have compromised your body's ability to process more complex foods. This grain survived thousands of years because it works, because it keeps people alive and healthy under the worst conditions. Rye fills darker bins, grain that grows in conditions where wheat fails, that provided the foundation for survival in northern climates where other grains couldn't reliably mature. Dense, nutritious flour that creates bread with staying power, bread that provides sustained energy rather than the quick spikes and crashes of processed foods. You touch barley, feeling the papery hulls that protect the grain kernels from moisture, from insects, from time itself. barley that could be ground for flour, cooked whole for porridge, malted for beverages that provided B vitamins when fresh fruits became unavailable, versatile grain that served multiple nutritional functions that adapted to whatever preservation and preparation methods available resources allowed, corn kernels, not sweet corn from modern gardens, but field corn selected for storage and grinding, fill the largest bins. Dent corn that could dry completely on the stalk that could be stored for years without losing its ability to provide complete nutrition when combined with beans that formed the foundation of survival for entire civilizations in the Americas. The mill teaches you the crucial difference between fresh ground flour and stored flour, between nutrition that remains alive and nutrition that deteriorates rapidly once the grain is broken. Fresh ground flour still contains the wheat germ with its essential oils, the bran with its fiber, and B vitamins, the nutrients that make grain genuinely nourishing rather than merely filling. You watch the millstones work, limestone and iron grinding together to create flour, without the high heat processing that destroys vitamins, without the chemical treatments that extend shelf life at the expense of nutritional value. This is slow food in its truest sense, grain processed at the speed that preserves its life-giving properties. Buckwheat occupies smaller bins, pseudo-grain that isn't actually grain at all, but provides complete protein profiles that grows quickly in poor soils that could be planted late in the season when other crops failed and still provide harvest before frost. Insurance grain that provided nutrition when primary grain crops couldn't be relied upon. Oats rest nearby, grain that could be eaten raw if necessary, that provided sustained energy for hard physical work, that contained soluble fiber capable of maintaining digestive health when dietary variety became limited. Oats that could be prepared as porridge with nothing but water and heat, that could sustain life indefinitely when combined with minimal fat and protein sources. You discover quinoa in small, precious containers, ancient grain from mountain civilizations that understood complete protein in plant form, grain that contained all essential amino acids necessary for human survival. This wasn't exotic health food. This was practical survival nutrition developed by people whose lives depended on extracting maximum nutritional value from harsh growing conditions. The stone mill holds equipment for processing these grains in multiple ways, not just grinding for flour, but facilities for making cracked wheat, steel-cut oats, cornmeal in various textures, suitable for different preparation methods. Each processing method preserved different aspects of nutritional value, created different storage characteristics, served different survival purposes. Parching equipment sits nearby, devices for dry roasting grains to extend their storage life, to create portable nutrition that could sustain travelers, that could provide calories and protein when cooking facilities weren't available. Parched corn that sustained Native American travelers, parched wheat that provided energy for long journeys, processing methods that created genuinely portable nutrition. You learn the ancient wisdom of grain combining, how different grains provide different amino acid profiles that complement each other, how variety in grain consumption prevents deficiency diseases, how understanding grain nutrition makes the difference between mere survival and thriving during hardship. As flour dust settles in the afternoon light streaming through mill windows, you understand that you're witnessing the technology that built civilizations, the knowledge that sustained human life through the rise and fall of empires, the practical wisdom that might once again become essential when modern food systems prove less reliable than the ancient ways of grain. You find yourself walking through an autumn forest in 1910, following paths known to indigenous peoples for thousands of years, paths that lead to nature's hidden pantry where survival foods grow wild and free, waiting for those who understand their secrets. The air smells of fallen leaves and the rich, earthy decay that feeds the plants our ancestors relied upon when cultivated crops failed, when supply lines were cut, when survival depended on knowing how to find food where others saw only wilderness. Acorns crunch under your feet, thousands of them scattered across the forest floor like nature's own grain storage system. You don't see worthless nuts. You see carbohydrates that sustained entire civilizations, protein and fats that could carry families through winters when other food sources disappeared. Your hands gather the heavy brown nuts, feeling their weight, their promise of nutrition that requires only knowledge and patience to unlock. The process of making acorns edible is ancient chemistry, leaching out the bitter tannins that make raw acorns inedible, transforming them into flour that rivals wheat in nutritional value. You learn to identify the sweet acorns from white oaks that require minimal processing, the bitter acorns from red oaks that need extensive leaching but provide larger harvests, better storage characteristics. Water runs through baskets filled with ground acorn meal, the tannins slowly washing away in a process that could take days but resulted in flour that could be stored for years, that provided complete nutrition, that made the difference between starvation and survival for countless generations. This isn't primitive food, this is sophisticated understanding of plant chemistry, of nutrition, of how to transform apparently inedible materials into life-sustaining nourishment. Wild rice grows in shallow lakes nearby, not rice at all, but grass seed that provided protein and carbohydrates to northern peoples who understood its seasons, its harvesting requirements, its enormous nutritional potential. You wade into cold water where wild rice stalks bend heavy with seed, learning to bend the stalks over canoe sides, to beat the ripe seeds into bark containers, to process grain that required no cultivation but provided better nutrition than most domesticated alternatives. The processing of wild rice requires only fire and patience, parching the seeds to remove moisture, winnowing to separate grain from chaff, creating food that could store indefinitely, that provided complete amino acid profiles, that sustained hard physical work through the coldest months, food that required no agricultural infrastructure, no supply chains, only knowledge of where and when and how to harvest what nature provided freely. Walnuts hang heavy in trees around the lake, black walnuts with shells so hard they require stones to crack, but meat so rich in essential oils that a handful could provide the caloric density necessary for survival. Not the bland English walnuts of modern grocery stores, but native nuts selected by centuries of wildlife preferences for their nutritional density, their storage capabilities, their ability to remain fresh through winter months. You learn the patience required to process black walnuts, removing the staining hulls that could dye your hands for weeks, cracking shells without destroying the delicate meat inside, picking out nut meat that provided essential fatty acids impossible to obtain from plant sources. This was tedious work that required community cooperation, social systems built around seasonal food processing that ensured everyone had access to essential nutrition. Hickory nuts offer another source of essential fats, nuts that could be processed into hickory milk by pounding shells and meat together, boiling the mixture, straining out a liquid that provided complete nutrition for infants, invalids, anyone whose digestive system couldn't handle solid foods. This was baby formula that required no manufacturing, no supply chains, only understanding of how plants could provide exactly what human bodies needed. Wild onions push through forest soil, providing sulfur compounds essential for liver function, immune system support, cardiovascular health. Not the large, sweet onions of modern gardens, but small, sharp, wild onions that grew in poor soils that could be harvested year-round in many climates, that provided nutrients and medicinal compounds that could prevent the deficiency diseases that killed so many before modern medicine. Cattails grow in marsh areas, plants that provided multiple food sources from single locations. The roots could be processed into flour, the new shoots eaten as vegetables, the pollen gathered as protein-rich powder, the seed heads used as tinder for fire-making. Complete survival resources in single plant species that grew abundantly in wetland areas throughout most climate zones. You discover lamb's quarters growing as common weeds, plants that contained more vitamins and minerals than spinach, that grew without cultivation in disturbed soils, that could be eaten raw or cooked, fresh or dried for winter storage. This wasn't last resort famine food. This was nutritionally superior to most cultivated vegetables, free food that grew wherever human activity created the soil conditions it preferred. Plantain spreads across pathways, nature's band-aid that could be chewed and applied to wounds, that could be eaten for its mucilaginous properties that soothed digestive systems stressed by harsh conditions, poor diet, contaminated water. Medicine and food in one plant that followed human settlements, that grew more abundant where it was needed most. Wild berries hang from bushes throughout the forest. Elderberries rich in vitamin C and immune-supporting compounds, rose hips that contained more vitamin C than citrus fruits, hawthorn berries that supported cardiovascular function during the stress of survival situations. Not just food, but medicine, plants that provided specific nutrients necessary for maintaining health under difficult conditions. You learn to read the forest like a library, understanding which plants appeared in which seasons, which growing conditions produced the largest harvests, which processing methods preserved the most nutrition. This knowledge wasn't academic. This was life insurance written in leaves and roots and seeds, survival information that could save your life when all other resources failed. Mushrooms emerge from rotting logs, not the dangerous varieties that could kill, but the oyster mushrooms, chicken of the woods, other species that provided protein when meat became unavailable, that grew rapidly after rains, that could be dried for storage or eaten fresh to supplement diets lacking in essential amino acids. Pine needles offer vitamin C in concentrations that prevented scurvy, that could be brewed into tea, providing essential nutrients when fresh fruits and vegetables disappeared entirely. Inner bark from pine trees could be processed into emergency flour, providing carbohydrates when grain stores ran out, when foraging became the difference between survival and starvation. The forest teaches patience, teaches observation, teaches the difference between food that's convenient and food that's truly sustainable. As afternoon light filters through leaves that will soon fall and reveal winter's challenges, you understand that you're learning skills that sustained human life for thousands of years before agriculture, skills that might once again become essential when modern food systems prove less reliable than the ancient wisdom of the wild. Wild foods require no planting, no cultivation, no supply chains vulnerable to disruption. They require only knowledge, only the understanding that nature provides everything necessary for human survival if you know where to look, when to harvest, how to process what grows freely around us. This is insurance against uncertainty, preparation for times when the easy answers stop working. You enter a cool basement from 1890 where the air itself seems alive with beneficial microorganisms, where fermentation crocks bubble quietly with the ancient magic that transforms simple ingredients into foods that don't just resist spoilage, but actually improve with time. Here, in this dim space filled with the sounds of slow fermentation, you discover preservation methods that create living foods capable of sustaining human health through the most challenging conditions. Sourdough starter rests in a wooden bowl, thick and creamy, with wild yeasts captured from the air itself, organisms that have been fed and maintained for decades, passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. You don't need commercial yeast for this. You don't need any modern ingredients or equipment. You just need flour, water, and the patience to allow wild microorganisms to establish the symbiotic relationships that create living bread. Your nose catches the sharp, fruity smell of active fermentation, the tang that tells you beneficial bacteria and wild yeasts are thriving, creating enzymes that pre-digest proteins and carbohydrates, making bread that's genuinely nourishing rather than merely filling. This starter could produce bread daily for years, decades, creating nutrition from simple grain that could sustain life indefinitely when other food sources failed. The sourdough process creates bread that doesn't spoil quickly, that remains edible for days or weeks without refrigeration, that provides probiotics for digestive health, B vitamins that develop during fermentation, nutrients that aren't present in bread made with commercial yeast. This is living food that continues to work in your digestive system, supporting the beneficial bacteria that maintain immune function, nutrient absorption, overall health. Milk ferments slowly in wide-mouthed crocks, transforming from something that spoils rapidly into kefir and yogurt that remain stable for weeks, that provide complete proteins, beneficial bacteria, nutrients that improve rather than deteriorate with time. Not the sweetened, processed yogurt of modern grocery stores, but the real thing, thick, tangy, cultured milk that provided essential nutrition when fresh milk became unavailable. The fermentation of dairy requires no equipment more complex than clean containers and starter cultures that could be maintained indefinitely once established, that created foods with longer shelf lives than the original milk, foods that provided probiotics essential for digestive health during times when diet became restricted, monotonous, lacking in variety. Cheese ages on wooden shelves, wheels wrapped in cloth, developing rinds that protect the interior from spoilage while allowing beneficial molds to work their transformative magic. Hard cheeses that could last for years without refrigeration, that concentrated the nutrition of gallons of milk into portable forms, that provided complete proteins and essential fats when other protein sources became scarce. You learn the patience required for proper cheese aging, the environmental controls that relied not on electricity but on understanding of temperature, humidity, air circulation. Root cellars and cheese caves that maintained constant conditions through seasonal variations, that created environments where beneficial microorganisms thrived while harmful bacteria couldn't survive. Fermented vegetables fill crock after crock, not just the Germanic sauerkraut you discovered earlier, but Korean kimchi, Japanese miso, fermented foods from every culture that understood how beneficial bacteria could preserve harvests, concentrate nutrition, create foods that supported health through winter months when fresh vegetables became memory. Miso paste sits in wooden vats, soybeans fermented with koji cultures for years until they become concentrates of umami flavor and complete amino acids. Not condiment, but medicine, fermented protein that could provide essential nutrition in minimal quantities, that could enhance the nutritional value of simple grains and vegetables, that transformed basic ingredients into complete survival meals. The fermentation process creates nutrients that weren't present in the original ingredients. B12 that develops in fermented vegetables, vitamin K2 that forms in fermented dairy and meat, amino acid profiles that become complete through bacterial action. This isn't just preservation, this is nutritional enhancement, the creation of foods more nutritious than their original ingredients. Fermented fish sauce ages in ceramic containers, providing concentrated protein and minerals in liquid form that could enhance the nutritional value of grain-based meals that supplied essential amino acids and trace minerals often lacking in plant-based survival diets. Small amounts provided enormous nutritional impact, making monotonous foods both palatable and genuinely nourishing. You discover fermented meat preparations, not just dried and smoked meats, but actually fermented sausages where beneficial bacteria work to preserve protein while developing complex flavors and enhanced digestibility. These foods could hang at room temperature for months without spoiling, providing complete nutrition from small amounts, concentrating the nutritional value of large amounts of fresh meat into shelf-stable forms. Wild fermentation attracts beneficial microorganisms from the environment itself, creating unique bacterial and yeast cultures adapted to local conditions, local ingredients, local nutritional needs. Every region developed its own fermented foods based on available ingredients and climate conditions, creating preservation methods perfectly adapted to local survival challenges. The basement holds equipment for maintaining fermentation cultures, starter cultures that could be dried for long-term storage, revived when needed, shared between families and communities as insurance against loss of fermentation capacity. These cultures represented community resources, biological technologies maintained through social cooperation rather than industrial production. Temperature control for fermentation required understanding of seasonal variations, insulation methods, thermal mass that maintained stable conditions without external energy inputs, cold cellars that stayed cool in summer, warm areas that provided fermentation temperatures in winter, environmental management that worked with natural systems rather than fighting them. You learn to recognize the signs of healthy fermentation, the sounds, smells, visual cues that indicate beneficial organisms are thriving, that harmful bacteria haven't gained foothold, that fermentation is proceeding safely toward preservation rather than spoilage. These skills required practice, observation, understanding of how fermentation actually works, rather than blind faith in industrial processes. Fermented beverages occupy their own corner of the basement, not alcohol for intoxication, but nutritional drinks that provided B vitamins, probiotics, minerals leached from herbs and grains during fermentation, water kefir that transformed simple sugar water into vitamin-rich beverages, kombucha that fermented tea into drinks that supported liver function, digestive health, immune system strength. These fermented drinks solved the problem of water safety without requiring fuel for boiling, chemical treatments, complex filtration systems. The fermentation process itself killed harmful bacteria while creating beneficial compounds, turning questionable water sources into beverages that actively supported health rather than merely avoiding harm. You taste authentic fermented beverages, not the sweetened, pasteurized versions from modern stores, but the real thing, alive with beneficial organisms, tart with organic acids that support digestion, rich with nutrients that developed during fermentation. Drinks that provided essential nutrition when fresh fruits became unavailable, when vitamin deficiencies threatened survival. The basement teaches you that fermentation is agriculture of microorganisms, cultivation of beneficial bacteria, and yeasts that work for human benefit, creating preservation systems that improve rather than degrade with time. This is technology so sophisticated that modern science is only beginning to understand it, yet so simple that every household once maintained these cultures as naturally as keeping fire. Fermented foods require no refrigeration, no artificial preservatives, no supply chains vulnerable to disruption. They require only understanding of how beneficial microorganisms work, how to maintain the conditions they need to thrive, how to recognize when fermentation is working properly versus when something has gone wrong. As you stand among these bubbling crocks and aging cheeses, you understand that you're witnessing the original biotechnology, the use of living systems to create foods that don't just resist spoilage but actively support human health. Fermentation creates foods that could sustain life through the longest hardships, that provide nutrition superior to fresh foods, that demonstrate our ancestors' sophisticated understanding of how life works with life to create sustenance. Our ancestors never had the gut issues we face today, because they ate these living, fermented foods daily. Their skin glowed, they aged slower, their digestion was perfect. Modern science now proves this gut-skin connection our ancestors intuitively knew. These fermentation methods created the same probiotics and nutrients that kept their microbiome and their skin healthy for decades. If you want to get similar benefits while learning these traditional skills, I've found something that bridges that gap using many of the same ingredients our ancestors relied on, like the dandelion and ginger they used for digestive health. Link in the comments. The quiet sounds of fermentation, the gentle bubbling, the occasional hiss of gases escaping remind you that these are living systems, biological processes that connect you to the millions of years of evolution that created the microorganisms now working to preserve your food, enhance your nutrition, support your survival. You've traveled through root cellars and smokehouses, through mills and forests and fermentation chambers, witnessing the quiet wisdom that sustained human life through countless challenges our modern world has forgotten how to face. These weren't just foods. These were technologies, biological systems, community knowledge that created independence from the fragile supply chains we now take for granted. The 25 forgotten foods you've discovered tonight weren't exotic delicacies or primitive substitutes. They were sophisticated solutions developed by people who understood that survival depended not on convenience stores and delivery trucks, but on knowing how to work with natural systems, how to preserve abundance for scarcity, how to create nutrition from simple ingredients available anywhere. These foods could save your life in 2027, not because the future will necessarily bring catastrophe, but because understanding these preservation methods creates genuine food security, real independence, the confidence that comes from knowing you can feed yourself and your family regardless of what modern systems do or don't provide. Food preservation wasn't just about making meals last longer. It was about creating community resilience, seasonal preparation, the kind of thinking that looks ahead to winter, to hardship, to uncertainty, and prepares accordingly. Our ancestors lived with the understanding that abundance alternates with scarcity, that preparation during plenty determines survival during want. So rest now, keeper of forgotten knowledge. Let these old ways settle into your memory like nutrients, settling into preserved foods, becoming more valuable with time. Think about the root cellars' patient preservation, the smokehouses' transformative chemistry, the mills' ancient rhythm grinding grain into sustenance. Feel the forest's wild abundance. Taste the fermentation's living magic. And perhaps, if you listen closely to the quiet night around you, you'll hear the sounds our ancestors knew so well. The gentle bubbling of fermentation crocks, the whisper of smoke rising from preservation fires, the rustle of dried foods stored safely against whatever tomorrow might bring. Sleep deeply, knowing that the knowledge to survive has not been lost, only temporarily forgotten, waiting for those wise enough to remember that true security comes not from depending on systems beyond our control, but from understanding the ancient ways that sustained life through every challenge history has offered.